I have seen the new Blade Runner, Chris. It was good.
That was fucking great.
I liked it. I really liked it. I could see somebody hating it, though. It is, I mean, dear Lord, it's long and it's slow. Well, I mean, if you're not up for that, then you are in trouble before you even start on this one.
Yeah, I think, like, someone said to me, what did you do weekend? I was like, I saw Blade Runner. They were like, oh, was it good? I was like, what did you think of the original Blade Runner? And they were like, it's all right. I was like, you'll think this is all right then. Had a similar conversation. I said, what did you think of the original Blade Runner? They were like, oh, I think it's a classic. I was like, you'll love this. I think whatever your opinion is on the original Blade Runner, that will be your opinion on this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Especially if the original Blade Runner version you saw was not the theatrical, but was the slower, more methodical director's
final cut.
Yeah, the final cut of the director's cut. Yeah, for sure. If that's what you've seen, then yeah, you're in for a bit of a treat.
We came out and Ronnie, who's itching to come back on the podcast at some point.
We'll have her back anytime.
Yeah. When we came out, and I went, she went, "What did you think?" And I went, "That was a sequel to Blade Runner." And she was like, "Wow, I'm glad you had to see that to work that out, Chris." She was like, "It's probably because it was literally a sequel to Blade Runner." And I was like, "No, what I mean by that, like, is sometimes you see sequels, and I couldn't think of a good example, and they just don't feel like the original film, or they feel like an updated shit version of the original film."
Or it feels like the person who created it just like completely misunderstood what was good about the original property. Yeah, you get that a lot.
This felt like you could watch those two movies back to back and be told they were a deliberate 2-part story, filmed and airing together, and you would believe it. Like 100%. I just thought visually, tonally, I thought it was great. I thought it was like you say, it is long. But I knew going in it was long, and I don't think it's boring at all.
No, I didn't. I didn't find it boring. That's for sure.
No, I think it goes by quick enough. But you're right. I think for some people, that's going to be a problem. I really think people should watch the first one first, and if you watch the first one and enjoy it, go and see the second one.
I had a friend the other day who said walked out of Blade Runner 2049. I was like, walked out? That's it? Wow, what happened? Oh, I was baffled, mate. That's the most confusing movie I've ever seen. Well, did you see the first one? There's a first one? Oh, dear Lord. Like,
yeah.
Like, what were you expecting?
Yeah, that is the part. They have marketed it as, this is a Harrison Ford Ryan Gosling film. Do you know what I mean? They've not really gone, you probably should see the first one. I've even seen interviews where they're like, I don't think it's necessary to see the first one. It is. Like,
100% it is.
It really is.
Yeah, because this doubles down on the tone. That's, I think, arguably the choice they made that maybe makes this problematic for some people, is that they made a choice to double down on the pacing and tone of the original. And if you love the original, then that's great, because it's a more committed version of that idea, if that makes sense. Because these days you can be bolder and you can just go, you know what, it's going to be 2.5 hours. You know what, we're going to spend loads of scenes just very quietly watching the character interact with the world around him, so we can, see how he puts the clues together and watch him think. You're either going to like that or you're not, but we're not going to apologize for it and we're not going to adjust it. But I think if you're the sort of person who might not be into that, watching the first one is like a really good prep for it, because it puts you in that mindset before you then get it doubled down on.
I watched the first one the night before, which was a great way to do it. I'd recommend that. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. And I think that thing, that what you're just talking about, could be summed up by the fact that I concentrated throughout all of it, and then at one point, I think my phone flashed a lot, so I quickly looked at it, and then I was like, right, I've got to give this film the attention it deserves. So I rewound it to go from where I looked at my phone, right? Mm-hmm. So, because it is a film you need to watch, you can't be looking at your phone having other conversations.
Unless of course you've got the theatrical cut in which Harrison Ford's narration will tell you everything that's happening as it's happening.
Yeah, but I'd recommend the final cut from what I can tell.
Yeah.
So I rewind too far. So I then fast forward a little bit, and instead of fast forwarding, I just click the button that takes me forward every 10 seconds, right? And I'm like, Harrison Ford's walking up the stairs, 10 seconds. He's still walking up the stairs, 10 seconds. He's still walking up the stairs. There are scenes where characters walking from A to B will get minutes dedicated to them.
But I think it's all part of the way that film builds its tone and world there. Because while that's happening, there's ads flashing in the background, or there's other interesting things happening with the music. The visuals are usually very good. It's the first film I've ever seen where I've been okay with that happening. Because I watched I watched The Revenant last year and just thought basically they shot it and it looks beautiful. They shot it with natural lighting, which no film ever does. The shots took them hours to get because they had to wait till the sun was in the right perfect point before they could even shoot the scenes. Then they'd only have a 20-minute window to shoot it, and then they'd have to wait till the next day if they didn't get it. I mean, the dedication to making that film that way is incredible. And even in that film, I was like, too much time spent on the scenery. I know that it took them hours to get it just right, and they really had to work hard at it, but Jesus Christ. Like, that film really needed to take some of the weight out because I didn't just want to stare at trees. But in the world of Blade Runner, somehow it's okay. It's weird how it can be a criticism in one film and be totally fine in the other. Without spoiling 2049, because obviously we're not going to. I should say that out front. No intention of spoiling Blade Runner for you here. I think that it's legitimately what it's most impressive is that it's found a completely unique story to tell in the world rather than just rehashing the early story. So so the story of the first one, which at this point most people would know, is basically that there's these things called replicants on planet Earth, and they're banned because they're only supposed to be out on these mining colonies. So there's these guys who work with the police called Blade Runners. Their job is to retire replicants, which is a code word for just killing them basically. So there's this old weird test that they use to try and track them down, and Harrison Ford is the Blade Runner, and he's tasked with killing 4 that have snuck onto Earth. And that's the premise of the first movie. Dead simple. So he's sort of investigating where they might be, following clues, and that's hopefully leading into them, and then his goal is to take them out. So that's all fine and hunky-dory. The plot for the second one, this one, it could have easily been similar situation, but a more advanced version of the replicant, and Ryan Gosling's character as a Blade Runner goes out and has to bring back into the fray Harrison Ford because he's just good. He was the best. It could have easily been that. And I don't think I would have hated that. But what they've done here is they found a completely new angle and a completely new story. And what's cool is it's still got all that relevancy to modern day because, of course, at the moment, these replicants were the sort of dramatic thrust of the first movie, in my opinion. And one of the things that's so great about it is, ultimately, these replicants are so indistinguishable from me and you. It's like, well, why can't they exist? What's wrong with them? They're the same. They're just normal people as far as anyone could tell or can tell. They think like people. They move like people. They talk like people. So who cares if they live or die? In terms of why would you actively seek them out to destroy them? And I think that's a really interesting allegory for a situation we're in now, where it's like, we've got this rampant nationalism through various countries. Where there's people who, they look different, but ultimately they're the same. Why would you want to hurt them or target them? It just seems really unnecessary. So it's a really interesting allegory, I think.
And the technology element. Like there's scenes which include a guy who's in the first one who's a designer for replicants, and there's his house of things that he's making, and all of them you can draw parallels between those and what actually exists now, and
So that's all still present, but the story takes a completely different thrust, and it manages to extend the world and imbue the world with more cool science fiction concepts without bloating it, and it feels like a really clean, straightforward story. It unfolds, like I said, very slowly, but you're pulled in all the time. And you're drawn to it the whole time.
It also, as much as it's a completely different story, and that's very rare for a sequel, especially one where there's been a lot of time in between, it still justifiably draws in Deckard, draws in Harrison Ford's character, and draws in references to earlier films and stuff. And what it also does that it did have to do, but it wouldn't have shocked me if it didn't do, is this is 30 years in the future of the world that exists in the first movie. So it's not 30 years in the future from now. So what I mean by that is there are brands that were big in Blade Runner 2019, so the first film set in 2019. There are brands and advertisements that feature in that first film, and the brands are no longer active now, but they've kept them into 2049 because that's the world that Blade Runner exists.
Have you heard about
impressive.
You might not have heard about this, but have you heard about the Blade Runner curse?
No.
So basically every company, with the exception of Coke, that appeared as a big brand in the future in Blade Runner went bust shortly thereafter. It's like all the, like if you look through it, like Atari's the biggest, most notable one, and they're still around in some form, but their whole market just crashed like just years after this film came out. It's fascinating. Look, Google it at some point, Blade Runner Curse, and have a look at all the films that are a thing. Awesome. At some point, I'd love to do like a spoilery discussion and get into the nitty gritty because there's so much cool stuff in this.
Yeah, because I don't particularly. There's a really obvious way that a third film could go, but I don't want a third film.
No, I don't either. I'd be happy with them to do a third one in another 20 years, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, that would be fine. But I want them to do, and this is why it's difficult without spoiling. I wouldn't want them to do an all-out big Hollywood story, which they could easily do.
Yeah,
I'd want them to do what they did this time again. Yeah,
something subtle and odd and unique, and and there's so much I could talk about and would love to dive into in terms of how the story unfolds in this movie, but we don't want to spoil it, so we'll leave it at that. But I do recommend anybody who likes the sound of the things we're praising this film for, deep world building, thoughtful characters, interesting sort of science fiction concepts. If you're into if all those things are ticking boxes for you, then definitely go see it. And if you haven't seen the original, of course, you should as well. Is that what you were about to say?
Amazon Prime, £4 or whatever. Rent the first one. I think the cut to watch is the final cut. And watch that. And if you enjoy that,
final or directors, those two are pretty similar. And it depends whichever one you can find cheapest, I suppose. But either of those would do you well, I think.